Sportsbiz Talks.
Because if you don't evolve in this particular sphere, you're just going to stagnate overnight.
Today we have with us Mr. Hoshidar Gundevia, Head of Digital at IMG Reliance India. A few of the properties he's worked with include Mumbai Indians, Indian Super League, Reliance Foundation Youth Sports, and Lakme Fashion Week, amongst many others. Hoshidar, welcome to the podcast. So, very interested to know, from sports-based production to digitization, why don't you take us through your journey till now in the sports business industry?
It's been a little bit of a sort of a whirlwind of sorts. I started my journey from a professional perspective a while back now as an intern at Times Now on the sports desk, and since then I've graduated to a certain degree and moved on from there to Neo Sports, erstwhile Neo Sports, when they had the Indian national cricket rights. At that point in time, I was sort of assuming the role of a sports producer then, doing a lot of cricket-centric, or rather creating a lot of cricket-centric content for television, as well as football-specific content as well for their sort of sports-specific half-an-hour show that was sort of aired at that point in time. Since then, since Neo Sports, I've then sort of transitioned from television to digital when I sort of worked for the BCCI as a consultant to work on the IPL and then the Champions League T20. And then post that, obviously, it's sort of rolled on from there to a certain degree to sort of doing an MBA in football industries from the University of Liverpool, post which it was good timing when the Indian Super League was about to be sort of kick-started, so to speak, in 2014, and that was my way into the Indian football industry straight after my MBA. And I've been there since then, and it's been a whirlwind experience within the Indian football industry thus far as well.
Absolutely. But now that you're leading digital engagement, how would you paint the digital landscape in India?
It's a very sort of a broad question with regards to painting the digital landscape in India or within sport at this point in time. I think it's quite nascent as such in the sense that, with the advent of social media platforms and applications and websites, we've always had these available, at least from a websites and applications perspective. But social media has really sort of changed the game to a certain degree with regards to the mechanisms by which rights holders, whether you're in the form of a league or a club or athletes at this point in time, look at engaging with their key constituents, i.e. fans in the sports sort of genre. It's growing as a medium at this point in time. It's nowhere near where digital is looked at within the sports industry in the West or in the US at this point in time, or even in Europe for that matter. I think at this point in time, we see very successful sports IPs in India not necessarily paying a lot of attention to what they do across digital platforms. And that's not necessarily just random criticism. It's after sort of assessment of some sort, whether that's sort of blatant disregard, deliberate disregard, or inadvertent disinterest in investing on this sort of within this platform at this point in time. At this point in time, it's currently sort of divided into social media marketing and marketing through one's own products, websites, and apps. And most of our investment is geared towards social media, whereas websites and apps generally take a backseat, which I think will change going into the future as leagues and clubs sort of invest more time, effort, and money as well in developing their own sort of in-house competence to a certain degree.
If we have to narrow it down, where do agencies fit into this whole digitization of sports in India?
Right now, they are very much in the center of everything with regards to agencies. You name a sports entity, and they'll have an agency on board to manage their their digital workload, whether that's design, development of their products, websites, applications, or managing their content. Because I think until you get an internal buy-in from an organization perspective, organizations would look externally to get that so-called expertise in digital through the respective agencies. And it's a good time for agencies to sort of get in on the action, so to speak. And there are plenty of clients available for them to latch on to. My approach as sort of this industry moves towards a more sort of a mature stage, I would imagine a lot of entities will look at creating in-house teams which will essentially service the respective IPs, fans, clubs, leagues, whatever. You'll have in-house teams in the future which will serve content and engage fans of the future. I think agencies will, to a certain degree, help in ensuring that clubs and leagues and athletes reach a certain stage. And once that maturation sort of stage comes through, I think most entities will look at sort of in-house teams to cater to their digital needs. But right now, agencies are very much on the front foot, and I think they will be for the foreseeable future.
Fair enough. And then how do you strategize or maintain the fine balance between digital and social?
There is at this point in time, from where I sit at this point in time, wherein I'm involved in managing sort of digital assets for leagues as well as teams to a certain degree across two different sports IPs, of course. Sort of social is very much part of digital at this point in time. The digital outlook of a sports team or a sports league would include a website, an application, a lot of their presence across social media platforms, an OTT application maybe in the future as well, which serves a lot of video content. It's quite dependent on the objective of the respective IP, so to speak. So, for instance, the ISL pays a lot of attention on social media, and the intent is to ensure that the fans are engaged to a certain degree across its gamut of social platforms at this point in time. And for that, you need to have a constant, sort of consistent churn of content, engaging content, which hopefully fans like to a certain degree. There will be hits and misses to a certain degree, but it eventually all boils down to objective setting right at the forefront. What's your end game? Do you want to look at immediately increasing the reach of a particular sport or team? Do you want to, now being an established league or a team, want to engage fans further, or do you want to look at monetizing an already highly engaged fan base? It depends on where each entity is to a certain degree, but eventually it's all about either you're looking at reaching out to more people to spread awareness about your league or team or entity of that sort, or you're looking at engaging an already available fan base, or, which is the more sort of mature way of looking at it at this point in time, is you're looking at sort of monetizing to a certain degree on an existing highly engaged fan base.
So you mentioned OTT and fan engagement.
Yeah.
So perhaps could you, piggybacking off of that, could you maybe explain through an example of how leagues and clients are leveraging the positives and keeping their fans engaged in such a fragmented market?
I think a good example is Hotstar as an OTT platform of Star. I mean, they've invested heavily within the application, within the product, as well as from a marketing perspective, and obviously from a rights acquisition perspective, which is the whole and soul of ensuring that you have audiences sort of dedicated to your application for a prolonged duration. So the play along game that they launched for the IPL, which was a good sort of example of how they ensured that people consuming content on their application are are engaged further by essentially playing along while watching a match, either on their application or essentially on TV as well. Either way, their application was always utilized, which obviously helped them sort of garner more engagement, as well as probably more downloads in the long run with regards to the Hotstar app, which obviously is a good thing to mention to advertisers, and you get more subscribers to a certain degree, which obviously helps in driving more revenues in the future and generating more user level data as well, which again helps in advertising sort of parlance.
And coming back to the whole digital landscape, what are certain KPIs you focus on when measuring a campaign on digital?
With regards to key metrics, for me personally, as someone who's working within the digital sports sort of fraternity in India at this point in time, it's all about engagement. And that essentially translates into different terminologies within different platforms. So it's essentially your likes, shares, and comments across different platforms, more or less, as well as video consumption numbers, as well as the average time spent on any sort of application or website. I think these are the primary metrics that sort of we look at bettering each time, depending, of course, on the property, so to speak. So, for instance, for Mumbai Indians as an IP, it's always been about engagement, and we already have a decent fan base so reach is not really an issue. Everyone's already aware about the team, about the success that it's garnered over the past decade or so. So it's all about engagement from Mumbai Indians' perspective. With regards to the ISL, it's slightly different. It's also about reach. It's also about ensuring that more people are aware about the league in India, in not necessarily traditional football bastions. So it's a combination of sort of awareness and engagement with regards to the ISL. And then again, like I said, it all sort of depends from the overarching intent and objective related to each of these properties, so to speak.
Absolutely. And I'm sure attention is also getting divided across the ever expanding landscape.
Yes.
With digital and social coming in. So how are you trying to integrate that communication life cycle and still maintaining the original content at heart?
Listen, I mean, like I think you hit the nail on the head with regards to sort of concentration levels of people are sort of dwindling by the second as such. So you need to know sort of what's gonna essentially resonate with your fan base, for which you need to know exactly what your fans like, and you'll only know that in a sort of if you experiment a little bit and if you spend enough time consuming data around the performance of your sort of property to a certain degree, and sort of really deep diving into the insights. So yeah, in terms of the content, we try and keep it as sort of raw and authentic as possible across properties, making it slightly more emotional to a certain degree, so that it sort of resonates with fans in a certain way. Make it timely as much as possible. Context is very important as well. Publishing an image of a player scoring a goal within 2 minutes of that goal being scored real time makes a lot more difference than sort of publishing that image day after or the morning after, so to speak. So timeliness is very important as well. Experimentation with formats, experimentation with distribution platforms as well. You gotta sort of have a mixed strategy of sorts, and then eventually have a playbook which suits your particular sort of property's needs as much as possible, because you're probably not gonna hit the right marks across all sort of owned or operated distribution platforms at this point in time. Our consumption trends generally indicate that our fans are primarily on social at this point in time. So we try to reach where they are. And an alternate approach is to build sort of products which are good enough to attract the attention of your fans, so that they leave social and essentially engage with your products, whether it's your website or application. That's a sort of high investment, long-term commitment, which not everyone is in a position to sort of commit to at this point in time, I would say.
So we love sports because there are wins and losses and it's
Mm-hmm.
dramatic. So when a fan's favorite team isn't in focus, they get out of the season early, how do you still keep that fan engaged? How do you still keep them connected to
It's
that team
it's very
digitally?
difficult. If they, it's very difficult, and that's an ongoing battle that all clubs and all teams have. Um, Fortunately or unfortunately, sport is very sort of result based as well. Like in life in general. I mean, if you're working and if you don't deliver the results, it'll show, and very much in sport as well. So it often happens that if your team sort of wins, no matter what kind of content you publish right after, it's going to do well. And if your team loses, and no matter how good your content is that you'll be publishing, you will surely get a lot of negativity, or worst case, you will not get any engagement, and apathy will sort of come into the picture to a certain degree. So it's about being consistent with the communication and not necessarily stopping just because teams or players have done poorly over a prolonged duration. So consistency is key. um, Looking at creative ways of sort of engaging with fans, whether that's, like I mentioned previously, looking at different distribution platforms, new avenues to engage with existing fans, new formats to utilize as well, and obviously constantly evolving. Because if you don't evolve in this particular sphere, you're just going to stagnate overnight. That surrounds your particular club or team or player. It can get really tough really quickly. So you've got to put in the hard yards. There's no sort of shortcut in any way or form. So if your team's losing sort of 8 matches in a row, you cannot shut up shop and not communicate anything. You've got to keep the messaging going. You've got to ensure that the fans still believe that the team's going to do well. Make sure you generate original content with the players, the coaches. Keep the fans involved as much as possible. Sure, the numbers will not be as high as if you'd be winning, but keep the hope alive in communication. That's the only way you can um, sort of retain the fans' hope.
What are some takeaways you'd give to agencies who want to incorporate a transformative digital strategy?
Mm-hmm.
And subsequently, what's an advice you would give to individuals who want to perhaps step into your shoes and take on this evolving digital landscape of sport?
Yeah, well, I mean, with regards to advice to agencies, I don't think I'm the best person to give advice to any agency per se. Primarily because my experiences have been mixed working with agencies. But my only advice would be to sort of try and get into, really your clients. Try and identify what your clients' objectives are. If you know that, if you manage to get to that sort of core and the genesis of that particular problem, you can then sort of try and sort of get the client's buy-in as early as possible to try and achieve those objectives. Often I see agencies essentially just ticking a box and doing it for the sake of the check that comes in on a monthly basis, which is not necessarily what sport is all about. As you can imagine, it's driven by passion and needs to be fueled by it on a consistent basis. So with regards to agencies, I think putting in an honest effort on behalf of one's client would be my advice, without just putting in a sort of a half-hearted attempt at managing accounts. I mean, these terminologies that you mentioned with regards to transformative digital strategies and all of that. That's good to hear, honestly. But the proof of the pudding is in its eating, many ways, and ideation is good, but it's only on an Excel sheet or in a presentation if it's not executed well enough. So effort in execution as well is something that I would look at sort of instilling in multiple sort of agencies, and constant follow-ups and sort of iterations to work that's done on a regular basis, or not necessarily just sitting on one's laurels. Yeah, that's my advice to agencies, even though I feel probably I'm not the best person to do that.
Now, I'm sure you're being modest. And any advice to individuals, any skill sets that they should perhaps, maybe young executives should uh, learn or hone in on?
Oh, see, with regards to, so if any individual who's sort of looking at getting into digital and sports in India at this point in time needs to have a primary importance, sort of passion to work within the industry. It's not all fun and games. Ability to withstand pressure, commitment, significant commitment towards towards the job at hand, a really strong work ethic. I don't think anyone can sort of make it in this industry in India. Anyone worth their salt, let me just tell you that, without a solid work ethic, because it's tough. It's hard as nails, and it sometimes sort of knocks you down to a certain degree, but you need to have the wherewithal to get up quickly and get on with it, really, because there's no other way. With regards to the skill set, I think keeping oneself updated. I'm not going to talk about the standard bits with regards to knowing about social platforms and knowing about SEO and generating content and how to develop a website and UI and UX. Yeah, I mean, you can always get external help for all of that to a certain degree, but just having the knowledge to know where to look if you don't know, if you don't have the answer, that's a skill set that I generally sort of value as well. There's no harm in admitting that you don't know anything, or rather you don't know something, but you probably know where to look to get the necessary answers. Having the humility to sort of obviously accept that as well is also something that I would look at advising people. Everyone's not going to be walking into this industry with 20 years of experience, and that's okay. And that's okay. Having the humility to accept that you don't know something, but still require, or rather having the wherewithal to learn on the job to a certain degree, is also something that I would look at advising young kids at this point in time.
Thank you so much for your time and sharing such honest answers. I really learned a lot, and I hope people who listen to it can take away the same insights. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more such insights.